Hello and welcome to the Political Dispatch, the podcast that for the last 52 weeks has explored the big ideas and policies that have shaped our world.
I'm Lily Bott.
I'm Sid Kurupati.
And I'm Tom Spare.
Today we are celebrating a whole year of the Political Dispatch.
When we started, Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Joe Biden was still running to be President of the United States, Justin Trudeau was still the Canadian Prime Minister, and Nigel Farage was not the leader of the Reform Party.
What a difference a year makes in politics.
We have covered a lot of topics, and our last episode was episode 25, so we've made it to a quarter of a century. We're talking years.
And it was a fantastic episode, if I may say, featuring the amazing Chad Mott, aka Lily's dad, a high school teacher in the United States, talking about education under the Trump administration.
So what have we covered? Well, what haven't we covered? In our first two episodes, if we go way back when we started this podcast, we covered the UK general election, first with an election preview and then a results episode. And here's a clip from episode 2. The results are in. As we're speaking now, just Keir Starmer's coming into Downing Street. Sir Keir is the 58th Prime Minister to be elected, the first Labour Prime Minister in 14 years. And he's entering with his wife. They're just about to get out. There's lots of flag waving. I can see a few Welsh flags, which is great to see. And just a little reminder in terms of the spread of results, Labour won big across the UK, but won back lots of seats in Wales and in Scotland, which is a big moment for the party. Labour has won with 9 million votes, 35% of the share of votes, which is the lowest a winning party has ever won to get into government. Yeah, the spread of votes is pretty historic across the board, really. But yeah, it's been fascinating watching it from France. And most French folks aren't particularly interested in what's going on in Britain. So
they've got their own chaos right now, and I'm sure we can talk about that in a later episode. Episodes 3 and 4, I remember it was still like sunny, nice summer. I was editing these. Episodes 3 and 4, Tom interviewed Dr. Charles Develaine from the University of Kent, talking about Macron, the French elections, and some of France's most famous philosophers.
And then came episode 5, which was an absolute whirlwind of an episode, where we covered 54 days that transformed the United States presidential race. Here's a quick clip from that episode.
And on May 30th, Donald Trump became the first presidential nominee in history to be convicted of a felony. Then, June 27th, Joe Biden's debate performance against Donald Trump made the entire Democratic Party, as well as most of the U.S. and a lot of people around the world, incredibly concerned about his fitness to serve another term. And then, fast forwarding a few weeks, on July 13th, Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt. And Sid's going to tell us a little bit more about the reactions to that later in the episode. And then July 15th, Donald Trump selected J.D. Vance as his running mate, and we're also going to be talking about J.D. Vance and his background a little bit more. And then July 19th, back to back, Donald Trump formally accepted the Republican Party's presidential nomination. And then July 21st, Joe Biden makes the announcement that he will not be seeking re-election and passes the torch to his vice president, Kamala Harris. And a little known fact that I wanted to add in is that it was actually National Ice Cream Day. And everyone knows that ice cream is Joe Biden's favorite food. So my dad told me that, and he was like, throw that into the podcast. People need to know. Then also, following Biden's announcement, Kamala Harris responded on X saying, "I am honored to have the president's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination," which got the Democratic Party so fired up. And by July 22nd, just 24 hours after Biden had made his announcement, Kamala Harris's team announced that they had raised more than $81 million in a day, which smashed all of the prior political fundraising records. So that's where we are now. There's been so many exciting conversations going on, and I just kind of want to ask you guys what you're thinking, and then we'll kind of dive into some of these more specific topics, talk about some of the players, talk about some of the rhetoric around these different events. Where are your guys' heads at? What are you thinking?
I just couldn't. I know it's all like incredibly dramatic stuff, but I was just a bit. It's a bit a bit giddy, really. If you sort of list through all those things, and if someone wrote that into a TV series or something, you'd go, man, that's not going to happen. Like, this is like each episode's going to end with a cliffhanger. The president nearly gets assassinated. All of these things, and I'm not trying to sort of make light of it, really, but it is just absolutely bonkers. And our last couple of episodes, we talked about the general election. We thought, oh, this is all quite novel. Politics is sort of a bit more interesting now. And then you get the French elections. You go, oh, this is a lot more interesting. This is sort of fascinating how everything is going along. And then yes, these last few months in American politics is something else.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what Tom says. Kind of not to trivialize all the serious incidents that have taken place over the last few weeks, least of all the assassination attempt, but kind of seems like an entire season of House of Cards has already passed. We followed that up with episodes on the geopolitics of artificial intelligence, a politics and review episode, which kind of explored how things are in other sections of the world. And then Tom interviewed Dr. Catherine Simpson from Keele University talking about Ireland, Brexit, and UK relations.
Episodes 9 and 10 were some of my favourite episodes because we focused on the US presidential election. I was out in the US by that point, and I think we'd all together sort of been out there at a similar time. So we were sort of like comparing notes of like, how bad is it? Like, how bad is it getting? And so I really enjoyed those episodes. And it was just odd being out in the US in real time, sort of watching history play out.
And then we followed that series on the US up with episodes on COP29. We had a discussion in the next episode about democracy. And we started off the year reflecting on the life and legacy of the 39th president of the United States, Jimmy Carter.
In early January 2025, we looked at Meta, Musk, and the politics of social media. Probably we should do a follow-up on that now, guys, given that Musk has recently exited the United States government. Here's a quick clip from that episode.
On the 8th of January 2025, Meta announced it would no longer rely on third-party fact-checkers to moderate content across its platforms, mainly Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Instead, they're shifting towards what they call AI-enhanced, user-driven moderation, which just sounds full of, I don't know, sounds weird. What does it mean? It's a word salad. It's a word salad is what it is.
Who knows? But the decision sparked concern and, honestly, outrage among advocacy groups, journalists, policymakers, who are fearful that this move will open the floodgates to misinformation, especially as critical elections loom in several countries. And as we come off the back of the biggest election year in human history, 2024, it's a very interesting time to be doing this when we look at the political landscape around the world right now.
And while Meta will be trialing these new policies in the US, this decision is going to impact billions of Meta users around the world. In countries with fragile democracies, platforms like Facebook play an outsized role in shaping public opinion. Removing fact-checkers could embolden bad actors to spread false narratives without consequence.
Meta claims this shift will empower users to self-moderate, that's in quotes, and reduce bias in content moderation. But critics argue that relying on AI alone is risky. AI systems often lack the nuance needed to understand context, especially when it comes to politics.
And of course, let's not forget that Meta has faced lots of scrutiny before, from Cambridge Analytica to its role in spreading hate speech in Myanmar. The company's track record doesn't inspire confidence when it comes to political content moderation.
And while we're on the topic of questionable track records, let's talk a little bit about Elon Musk. Musk's ventures from Twitter to Starlink are increasingly intersecting with geopolitics.
Just look at last year. Musk's satellite internet constellation Starlink played a pivotal role in Ukraine's defense against Russia by providing internet access in conflict zones. By contributing so significantly to Ukrainian war effort, Musk's actions raised questions about the accountability of a private individual wielding such power.
Musk's ownership of X, formerly Twitter, has also stirred the pot when it comes to social media governance. His decisions to reinstate controversial accounts and to tweak his own content moderation policies have been criticized for amplifying divisive rhetoric, particularly in 2024, and as I mentioned, the largest election year in human history. And actually, these new meta policies are specifically modeled after the ones that Elon Musk created for X. So that was cited in their official, terms and conditions that Meta released on the 8th.
And we should definitely do a 6th-month anniversary of the Trump presidency when we get to it, to follow up on our episode of Trump's second act, as I covered the main points from the 47th president's inaugural speech. Well, the weird thing being the 45th and the 47th president, but there we go.
And after an episode looking at Gen Z, we interviewed Amelia and Bryson from Be the Change Media Network's podcast, The Ozark Agenda. And those were Living in Trump's America, parts 1 and 2. Our conversation was so good that we split it into 2 parts. Here's a clip from one of those episodes with Amelia and Bryson.
Amelia and Bryson, welcome to the Political Dispatch. We're really looking forward to this conversation. Before we get started, could you both introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Absolutely. Hi, y'all. My name is Amelia Southern Uribe, and more than anything, I'm grateful to be in this conversation with y'all, and in such a defining moment in history, and not just U.S. history, global history. I call myself a climate justice organizer and now a podcaster. My work is about preserving and empowering the voices of Black and Brown U.S. Southerners in our communities in the fight for environmental justice and challenging the systems that have long exploited us and our land. From the local level to international advocacy, I'm organizing to stop the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure and protect our communities for healthy air, clean water, and just the right to exist. So I'm excited to bring those perspectives to the Ozark Agenda, a podcast about the realities of the oppression and the power of resistance in the U.S. South. And thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. As Lily and Tom said, my name is Bryson Austin, and I identify as a person who believes in democracy and the oversight of the federal court system. I know that sounds weird and nerdy to say as an intro, but in the 21st century, it feels like we have to make civic education and engagement cool. I am co-podcaster with Amelia on the Ozark Agenda, and it is an extension of my work as the diversity and inclusion director at the University of Arkansas for our Associated Student Government. My work is in uplifting historically disenfranchised groups and making sure that capitalism is corrected to help the people that it's hurt and hopefully gotten rid of. Thank you for having us again.
Thank you so much for coming. We are so excited to have you here. And I think we'll get started with a very big, broad question. But as students and following the arrests of student activists in other parts of the country, and just also as people living in the U.S. right now, what is it like living in the U.S.? What is it like on your campus? Are there any noticeable shifts in discourse, in activism? Tell me just about the current moment and what you guys are living through right now in the U.S.
Well, I kind of want to frame the moment here that, Bryson and I are both campus organizers, student organizers, and seniors at the University of Arkansas. But it's not just about the University of Arkansas. It's not just about Brown University or Columbia University headlines that you've probably seen. But the political climate on our campus right now and campuses across the U.S. is a reflection of the larger struggles happening across the country, but also across the world. Battleground between those who want to preserve the status quo of, let's just say it, political violence, and also those of us that are fighting for something and something kind of beautiful, global solidarity and liberation. And the arrests of student activists, the repression of protests, and I think attempts to silence us as students is not new, but it is scary. It is scary. And I think that history shows us that when young people organize, when we name the systems that exploit us, when we confront them, those in power respond with fear. And I think that's what's just happening now. And fear breeds repression. And I just wanted to state that this overwhelming fear and shock and where we are as a country is not new, but it is exaggerated. And especially living in the US South, living in Arkansas, they tried Project 2025 out on us. We were Trump's America before it was a federal thing. And I think that's something that we've been fighting generationally, but especially for the last 10 years, there's been a difference. And it only makes organizing harder. But I think what I try to embody is that this repression doesn't mean that we have to retreat. It does not mean that we have to leave our organizing. It does not mean that we have to leave our communities to fend for themselves. It's something that we're close to and something that they don't want us to tap into. And that's the power of each other, and that's the power of solidarity.
That was an extremely insightful one for sure. It was great to hear Amelia and Bryson to give a really frank assessment of what's going on in Trump's America, especially from their perspective.
Yeah, and I think we were talking about this, weren't we, earlier, that it's probably worth listening to a sort of trilogy where if you were to listen to, Living in Trump's America Part 1 and 2, and then the interview that we've just done with Lily's dad, because I think it will complete a full picture there, just to get a full picture of what's going on in terms of activism, education, and the state of America as it is at the moment. We followed up that with a summary of global events in Serbia, Canada, and Turkey, followed by an episode Sid led, looking at AI's growing role in global elections. And I'm also going to amend my record here and say the most enjoyable episode that we've done to date. Well, at the time of writing, because I really enjoyed the last episode we just recorded, it was the politics of Star Wars, because, I was able to really geek out.
Lots of geeky references, but I think lots of politics in there too, so it fits. The next episode was a very different one. Tom interviewed Father Damien Howard, a senior Catholic chaplain at Oxford University, to talk about the life and legacy of Pope Francis.
Followed by a 10th anniversary commemoration of the Equal Marriage Act in Ireland.
And for the episode that followed, episode 24, I interviewed Zoe Daniels from the International Rescue Committee, the IRC, talking about the dire circumstances in Gaza. Here's a clip from that recent interview.
I think it's important to hear from the people in Gaza and from our colleagues there, from the IRC staff there. So, I have a quote from one of our team where they're saying that life in Gaza is no longer livable. There is no food, no cash, no means of survival. Markets are almost empty. Basic items like flour, rice, and oil, if found at all, are being sold at exorbitant prices. Bread, which was once a symbol of dignity and simplicity, is now a distant dream. This particular staff went on to say that she's facing the very real threat of famine. Her children wake up and say, "Mama, we want to eat. We want bread. We want to live like other children." I stand there helpless, searching for an answer, but there's nothing.
Thank you for sharing that, Zoe.
You're welcome.
And that episode was a timely reminder that politics isn't abstract, and it's not just about voting, parliaments, or protests. It's about human lives. It's about making choices, choosing when and when not to intervene. And Tom did an amazing job with that episode.
Couldn't agree more.
So if we move into a little part 2 of this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about our personal political highlights. We've covered the episodes that we came across this year, but now it's time for us each to pick our highlights from across the year. I think we can do this in kind of a quick fire way, but we can also dive into some of them that might be our shared political highlights. There are a couple of really big ones that might come up for all of us, but Tom, let's start with you. What are your highlights?
I was trying to think about this because we were talking before we started recording that there's a lot has happened in the last year. And I guess, and I was talking to a colleague about this earlier, that there's that saying, today's newspaper is tomorrow's fish and chip paper. So the news quickly cycles through and it always seems a bit old, but it's been really interesting observing, I would say, how quickly the transition to taking sort of more conservative positions politically has happened in America and in the UK, and how quickly the world has sort of changed around that. So if you think about, the UK general election reform, getting MPs and the conservative votes of disappearing, but also Labour not really getting what's the lowest percentage of any popular vote in UK history to govern outright. And then obviously we have the election in America. So there's been this whirlwind of speculation about how is the world going to change. But then also we've had the elections in Canada and Australia, and we've had the responses to the tariffs. So we've sort of seen this. I think my highlights is really just observing how quickly things are shifting at the moment from different sort of points of view. And I think that probably is best represented in Nigel Farage being elected into the House of Commons 30 years after he first ran to become an MP, which is worth bearing in mind. So there's this long time between him running and actually getting elected. And I think that's sort of a bit of a moment that he entered into the public arena. I remember listening to a podcast at the time, and there were some political awards, and they were saying, who do you think's going to be like newcomer of the year in these awards? And then someone said, well, it's going to be Nigel Farage, even though he's this old sort of hat of person that's been around for a long time. And then how much he's taken up the airwaves. I'm talking about him now, but also, the UK government is really trying to shift to try and take into consideration reform's perspective and the potential voters that come from that. And it's really risky business. So if it pays off very well. But if it doesn't, it could lead to quite a challenging circumstances. And I guess also just being out in America at the time of the elections as well, that was a pretty unique period and experience. Sid, how about yours? Any particular highlights?
Yeah, I think the main highlight for me was to try and see the patterns in the political campaigns that were happening across the world and try and understand what's actually causing these shifts. What is the kind of campaign messaging that's actually going around? And what I realized, and which is confirmed by multiple different sources which I followed up with, was that the far right in a lot of the major democracies that is in power at this point in time is in power because they've tried to present extremely simple solutions to highly complex problems. And they've been much better at just selling that message than anybody else. And that's what's really stood out, that how is it that the liberals, who are usually the ones who are much better at wordplay, understanding complexities and translating complexities, or, parties that are center left, or even center right for that matter, how is it that they've actually stumbled on this? That's been particularly a very interesting, it's been a highlight for me, I would say, over the last 1 year. And yeah, the use of technology in politics and policy has been of particular interest for me. The idea that politics is happening around technology, the idea that technology is being used to further certain ideologies, the weaponization of information, I think that's really stood out for me. And we don't really see an end to it, but there have been lots of tiny little beacons of hope. And those may be tiny in scale, but they are still very significant. So that's how I'd like to put it.
I think mine is similar to yours, Sid. I think for me, the biggest trend, I guess, it's definitely a low light, certainly not a highlight. But I think this attack on truth has been really concerning. I think as someone who studied journalism and still have such an interest in the way that people receive information and the way that people share information, and of course all of the work that I'm doing with Be the Change Media Network, I'm very concerned about things like Meta's removal of fact checkers. I think there were so many things that they were, as you said, Tom, they were news, they were huge at the time when they came out, and then very quickly got swept under the rug, but are going to have really lasting impacts on our political systems and on the way that we interact as global citizens. I think that I was absolutely shocked. I shouldn't have been, but I was shocked when the announcement came out about fact checkers being removed, third-party fact checkers. this is just starting in the US, but I think that we're going to see the impacts of some of this in the midterms in 2026. And we're going to start to see that very quickly as far as what the community notes program that they're inputting looks like. And I just have a lot of questions about it, but I think that a lot of people do. There's a lot of uncertainty around the way that social media platforms are going to continue to work. But I think not only social media, I think that also pertains to the traditional media landscape. So we are seeing lots of journalism outlets that have been very trusted becoming less trusted for one reason or another. We're seeing a lot of attacks on journalists around the world. I think that also happened in the US, at least in 2016 when Trump came to power. So that's not unique, but I think it's accelerating again. And what makes me really nervous is that we're starting to get to the point where it will be irreparable. I think that we're seeing a lot of these independent news media organizations popping up, which don't have the same standards as traditional journalism outlets, which makes me nervous because the BBC they have a commitment to being credible. They have a code that they follow. They have standards. They have ethics that have been ingrained in all their journalists, and they went through training for that. But when you think about a lot of podcasters, for example, I'm going to kind of throw ourselves under the rug. Even at the Political Dispatch, we are very intentional about always sharing the truth, but that's certainly not a priority for most people who are creating content online. And especially when you think about how many views you can get from misinformation, disinformation, that makes me really nervous. That's been kind of the trend that I've been following throughout this year, is just how concerning that is. And I don't necessarily see an end in sight as to the way that people's perceptions of the media are being formed and kind of who we trust now. But sorry, that just like took us down a very, very dark turn. So that's the low light that I've been following. My other question for all of you, because I was thinking about this in a different way as well. What was the most like shocking thing for you to see on TV? I think I can go first, but when I was like watching the BBC when Trump and JD Vance berated Volodymyr Zelensky on television and the BBC was airing it, I was shocked. I was shocked. Again, probably shouldn't have been, but I was just like literally watching the television just in silence. Were there moments like that for you guys that you just were absolutely stunned for some reason or another?
Yeah, I think there's a few. I suppose another sort of American related one was when the White House, they got rid of the press corps basically and just replaced it with podcasters and influencers. So that to me was quite shocking, because it's like this tradition of this relationship between the media and the presidency, and there's obviously massive like criticisms of it, the relationship between the media and the scrutiny. So if we think about Joe Biden, for example, and the revelations about his health before his most recent health diagnosis, in Jake Tapper's co-written book, Original Sin, where basically they were saying, the former president had not really been himself, quite understandably, after his son had died, pre-Biden, before Bo died, and post. And particularly how he'd slowed down so much in the last couple of years. I think, that relationship between the media and really the lapses of judgment that have been made between both these presidencies, both Biden and Trump. Obviously, the scenes that are coming out of, and we don't know the full picture because journalists aren't really allowed to be there or have been banned from there in Gaza. And that sort of was brought to home from the interview that I did with the International Rescue Committee, just shocking in so many other ways, and how much little intervention has taken place in the international community. And I guess Keir Starmer's recent speech on we are at risk of becoming an island of strangers, that was quite shocking to me. That is sort of I don't know. I was never expecting a Labour Prime Minister to utter those words, really. So yeah, for that for me, that's the American situation, and the Zelensky moment, but also followed up by the South African president coming to visit the White House and him being shown a video a lot, in the White House, in the Oval Office. Some really shocking, very combative moments, which seemed a bit unnecessary, really, given the state of the world.
Yeah, I think the couple of them are overlapping with you, Tom. Yeah. I think the most shocking one, of course, is the apathy the larger section of the more powerful section of the world has shown towards Palestine. I think that has been. I don't think I thought I'll live to see, quote unquote, a genocide to happen in our own time, but it is, and there's clearly seems no end to it. And the apathy or the fact the silence is what has really shocked me. But apart from that, I think what's really been disappointing out of all of it has been the fact that across the board, lies have become the new normal. And it's just so disappointing that you have world leaders from, different continents who are just spewing similar level of lies, and the public is kind of moving on with it, that, they know that it's lies, but we'll still go ahead and elect them. Yeah. So, yeah, I think if there has to be if I have to say what has been the most disappointing moment for me, it's the lies and the fact that the choices of the voters, it's a joke, I guess, in a lot of cases, not in every case, of course, but in a lot of cases. But that's how democracy works. Democracy is not exactly a perfect system. It is flawed. It takes every person's choice into perspective. And sometimes we as having certain political ideology or certain perspective of how the world should be, or how, the rights of every citizen should be, it doesn't exactly get reflected in the kind of leader that is chosen or the ideology that is elected. But every tenure is finite, and everything has a saturation point. And I do feel that there is a massive saturation point coming fairly soon for a lot of the misinformation and all the lies that is being said. Because, just to reference the previous episode that we did with Chad, there's going to be a point where, there's going to be disillusionment with lies as well. And there's going to be a saturation that's going to kick in to that. And I see that happening fairly soon. So I'm cautiously optimistic and critically minded.
I guess my question on that is, what do you think is going to be like the tipping point of people being tired of the lies? Like, what do you think will need to happen? I agree, but I just wonder, what are you anticipating needs to happen for that to kind of shift back?
So I think we do see a few examples of it already, right? So the main idea is that those who've elected the people into power and who are causing a certain amount of chaos in the world, when their politics, when the leader that they've elected and their politics and their decisions starts affecting the core constituencies, that's when we start seeing we start nearing the saturation point, or we see a fraying of their core constituencies, or core voters will start getting disillusioned by what your leader actually stands for, and when it starts affecting their personal lives, that's when the swing vote will happen. And this is going to happen across different countries, mind you. And there's going to be a certain repetitive nature of a lot of the politics that is going to be that is propagated by, say, the far right, or the alt right, or the ultra nationalists, or pseudo fascist kind of parties that are in power in a lot of countries. People are more empowered than they were before. People are more aware than what they were before. It only needs to hit home for them to take action. And you do see that happening. It may happen slowly. It may happen very quickly in some cases. But, the erosion of power will happen in some way or the other. And you will have a better alternative, or whichever alternative presents itself as to be a better alternative for that. So there's going to be a shift. So that's what kind of keeps me going. And that's what kind of keeps me doing these episodes as well in many ways.
Yeah, I wonder, adding on to that, I'm quite interested to see how, not sort of jumping ahead a bit here, but 2026 plays out, right? Because it's big in a couple of ways in the UK, because it's a test case of what we might see in future elections. So we have the Scottish and the Welsh elections going on, right, for the devolved elections. And at the moment, like Reform UK wide is polling very well. So they're actually ahead of or equal to or near close to Labour. In Wales, Plaid Cymru look like they're sort of ahead. And for anyone that's not familiar, Plaid Cymru is sort of like the left-wing sort of nationalist party of Wales. They're sort of the party that want independence historically, very dominated by the sort of Welsh language community. And then you have Reform in sort of potentially second place. They don't have a leader in Wales. The only leader they have is Nigel Farage. He's not able to stand in the Senedd elections because he's not a resident in Wales. So, where does the party go there? Who will their leader be? And then in Scotland as well, there's a by-election coming up, I think, day after this episode's released. Day before, sorry, there would have been an election, a by-election in Scotland, and Reform are trying to push it there. So that's like an interesting test case in the UK context and how political parties respond to that. But also with the midterms in America, there's actually a potential case where you've got a lot of the Democrat hierarchy being displaced and being tested in primaries. So in the UK, we don't really have this primary situation that the political parties will pick a candidate and they're the person that will be put forward to vote for in the UK case, or it's a little bit different in Wales because there's changes to the political system. But in America, there's often a potential case for real embarrassment where long-serving politicians are replaced by relative novices or sort of left-of-field candidates. AOC, for example, could end up challenging Chuck Schumer, who's the senator, a minority leader, leader basically of the Democrats in the Senate. And there's sort of a number of other politicians on the ticket that might be replaced as well. So that for me would be quite interesting if sort of like the institutionalists, the sort of traditional sort of leaders of the Democratic Party are replaced by people that are younger, more left wing, more liberal. What might that come? What sort of result might that bring up? Would it be a sort of that sort of response that a lot of people had to Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, or we don't want to go that far? In the same with how they responded to Bernie Sanders, a lot of positive people, but also a lot of people talking about he's too left wing for America. So yeah, for me, I think that sort of talks to what you're talking about, Sid, that there is potential for a shift, but what way that goes is really unclear, and that, I suppose that's the thing is you can't really hope for that to happen. You've got to make it happen in many ways, wherever you are, and it's what, like your dad said, Lily, in quoting Abraham Lincoln, it's like, whatever you are, be a good one, and I suppose that it speaks to the network that we're part of. We've got lots of really inspiring people that are doing excellent shows, young people who are engaged and want to make a difference in the world. And I suppose sometimes this, but on our episodes, we end up all being a bit depressed because the state of the world. But I definitely think after our chat with your dad, it really helped me sort of think less about worrying about things that I have no control over and more about how can I be the best version of myself to help others, and serve other people or serve my community or whatever. So that's what I'm sort of taking away from this last year of doing these episodes. Try to be less sort of depressed about the world and how can I help make it better,
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think we've had a couple of episodes that have ended on that message of hope, for one, but I think two, being the best version of yourself that you can be every day. So just like the small things. I know that we've talked about this a good amount, but whether that is, posting on social media, which isn't a small thing, but it is something that you can do. It's very accessible. Whether that's listening to a podcast episode, sharing it with someone. I think there's so many ways for us to be better and for us to try to make the world a better place. So it is just doing those little bits, and all of it counts. I think that's something that with Be the Change podcast, I've really just come to understand, is that everybody has their own way of making change and showing up in the world. And not every way will be for everyone. For some people, podcasting seems like the scariest thing in the entire world, or it's just something that they would never do. For me, that's the way that I choose to make change and amplify people's voices. But, for other people, that's having one-on-one conversations to try to break down echo chambers. For other people, that's grabbing the mic at giant protests and public speaking in that way. There's so many different ways to do good in the world. It's just finding what makes sense for you. And every effort is important. So I totally agree. We can end this episode too on a positive note, because I think this year has been really, really good for all of us as far as being able to talk, get these conversations out there, share our conversations that we're already having, hopefully get some listeners who have appreciated these conversations and can kind of feel some of this sentiment with us. It's just been wonderful to do this year with you all, and I'm excited for the next year. But yeah, this is a very sappy but good episode for us, I think.
I know this is two loving episodes basically where we're going, oh, we all fantastic. But yeah, that's any other final thoughts, Sid, before we draw this to a close?
No, I think Lily summed it up perfectly. Yeah, I'm good with that. Yeah.
Great stuff. So that's our podcast's year anniversary episode pretty much summed up. I think this is right. The next time we'll be together, if I'm not mistaken, definitely in person, is when we'll be graduating, which is very exciting.
I think that's right. And Cardiff has all of its graduation ceremonies in mid-July in 1 week. So it's very intense for Cardiff. But we'll get to meet up with lots of our friends, and we'll get to celebrate our time studying in the School of Journalism.
Absolutely. I simply can't wait for that. And maybe we'll do some bit of recording then as well. What do you guys think?
I hope so.
That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
We can corner a Naki, get a quote.
Definitely. Well, that's all for us this week. You can find us wherever you found this episode. Please subscribe, like, and share this podcast so we can reach more people and drive up interest in the show. My name is Lily Mott.
I'm Tom Spett.
And I'm Sid Kurapati. You've been listening to the Political Dispatch.